This video is made possible by North Naperville Autos. If you're looking for a quality used car in the Chicagoland area, North Naperville Autos is here to help. Browse their inventory at northnapervilleautos.com and drive home in a new vehicle today. Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zach and today I am driving a 1990 Chevy Corvette ZR-1. Up front is a 5.7 liter V8 and down below is a 6-speed manual transmission. Now I'm super excited to be driving this here ZR-1 because this is the first ZR-1. This isn't my first ZR-1. I actually drove a C6 ZR-1 last year and I loved it. But this is the first ZR-1 that Chevy produced. Well, Chevy and their little friends over at Lotus. And by friends, I mean General Motors actually purchased Lotus back in the late 80s, and Lotus helped design this car, the ZR-1 specifically. So I'm super excited to be talking about and driving this piece of American and Corvette history. Let's get back to that 5.7 liter V8 under the hood. It is the LT5 engine. It's an all aluminum block 32 valve V8 and puts out about 375 horsepower. Now, it's a very interesting engine for me because it is sort of the regular run-of-the-mill late 80s lopey throaty blah 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 V8, but it revs to 6,500, which is decently high. It's this weird mix of modern V8 and classic V8. You know, classic V8s I think of like old Buick Roadmasters and things like that, and modern V8s I think of like a GT350. So this is a good mix between those two cars. It's not the fastest thing in the world, especially by modern standards. However, back in the day, it was. This was a very fast car for its time, one of the fastest. Today, we're just spoiled by Tesla P100Ds and other vehicles of such. Like I said, paired to it is a 6-speed manual transmission. Now, the manual actually feels really good, really notchy feel, but very, very heavy. Getting it into gear takes some muscle. People who grew up driving Honda Civics are gonna struggle getting it into gear, but that's what they wanted. The clutch has a good weight to it. It's not heavy, it's not light either. And I think it has a really meaty, really beefy feel to it and is really, really reassuring when I am shifting gears. Last but not least, the Corvette, of course, is rear-wheel drive. Let's talk about the interior. We have a lot to go through in here because this is a 1990, but it was really developed in the 80s, and boy, does it show. Well, in front of me, I have some very peculiar analog gauges. On the left is a giant tachometer, and on the right is my oil pressure, oil temperature, coolant temperature, and battery voltage. In the center, I do get a digital readout. However, time has not been kind to this readout, and so it is very, very hard to see. There's a fuel gauge and speedometer somewhere in there, but I can't quite tell you exactly where. The steering wheel has no buttons on it besides a horn, and of course this is before the era of airbags. And then to the left of me, I have my headlight switches with a weird little dimmer side switch, very interesting there. And then as we swoop down the door, we have our power mirrors and power windows, and then lock and unlock on the door. This is where we start to notice that everything in the C4 Corvette is angled towards the driver. Very Supra-esque, very NSX-esque, very FD-RX-7-esque. But before we move on to the center, actually down by my left leg is the handbrake. This is a very 80s thing to do. And what's interesting is when you pull up the handbrake, you can then just push it right back down. It's still engaged, but it moves out of the way for your leg. Very, very interesting. Now moving into the center, we have our trip monitor segment, which is like instant fuel economy, range, trip odometer, fuel, things like that. And then to the right, this is where you find all of your warning lights. Again, very, very 80s. Then I have my climate controls. I do have air conditioning, which is very, very nice. And it has all orange readouts. Then I have the stock GM 1990 radio, which has like tune, I have bass and fade and all these buttons, tons and tons of buttons. The 80s loved their buttons. Quite frankly, so do I. But down below that, I have a very interesting switch that I've never seen in a car before. This is for the engine power, so you can leave it on normal or flick it over to full. Now, there's no indication anywhere else on the dash that you've done this besides just turning this physical key, and it's not actually a key, it's just a switch. You can't pull it out and you can't lose it, which I think is the nicest thing. But I've never seen something like that, and that really sort of solidifies the sort of fighter jet feel of this car. Everything's angled towards me, and then I have to flip this switch when I want full power. This is the 90s equivalent of the red key in the Hellcat. Then I have the shifter itself. Like I said, it feels really good, really notchy, and of course this car has 13,000 miles, so I would expect the bushings to still be good. One thing I dislike about the transmission is that it does have a very, very primitive version of Chevy's skip shift. When I'm just cruising low RPM, it wants me to go from first gear into fourth gear to save gas. I don't want to do that. So of course you can override it. It feels like someone else's hand is guiding the shifter, but as long as you pull hard enough, you should be okay. To the right of that, I do have cup holders, so we will do a big friggin' bottle test here in the C4 ZR-1. And I mean, it's a joke. There's no way that would have fit. Anyone with two eyes and a brain could figure out that the big friggin' bottle would not fit in there, so the C4 ZR-1 gets a fail. Then down below the cup holder and shifter, we have some very interesting buttons. First of all, this is where you first start to see one of many options for the front power seats. Very, very peculiar to put it here on the center console, but those are not the only power seat options. But in the middle of that, we have three different ride quality settings. So this car actually has adaptive suspension, meaning it'll actually change how it rides depending on what you set it in. So we have Tour, which is going to be the softest, then Sport, and Performance. Performance is going to be the hardest, most rigid for cornering, driving. That's what that's for. And I love that adjustability. Very, very 90s. But now we got to talk about the seats. The seats are leather, and they have so many different adjustments on them. You can make them wider, skinnier, taller, longer, move them forward and back, and that's all done on the sides of the seats. Again, a very peculiar place to put it, but that's where Chevy decided the best spot for it was. The seats are comfortable once you get them actually adjusted to your proper settings. It took me a little while to really dial in these seats, but I think I got a good street tune on them. Now, we don't have back seats, thank God, so let's talk about the looks. I like the look of the C4. I wish that the ZR-1 looked a little bit more special. Just a little bit, not much more, maybe a bigger wing on the back, maybe something special. It took me a couple glances to figure out that this even was a ZR-1. But there's a couple interesting things I do want to note about all C4s. Well, first of all, they have the fun headlights. They sort of have pop-up headlights, but kind of not. They actually roll, which is very interesting. And of course, you can toggle those. But then also something else about the exterior is the back. While the panel looks really nice, this is actually where the gas cap is found, which again, very peculiar and something you don't really see on cars all that much anymore. But now we got to talk about the C4 as a whole. What are my final thoughts here on the C4 ZR-1? Well, this is actually my first C4 that I've reviewed, or actually driven for that matter. And I have to say, this is a very, very interesting car. It's very clear to me that this bridges the gap between the ancient C3 and the modern C5. There's bits of modernness in this car. That engine, like I said, it's on its way. It's not a modern engine, but it's on its way. The shifter feels good and solid, unlike old cars of the 50s and 60s. This car handles really well. It makes almost 400 horsepower. I'm sure with a little bit of work, it would be well on its way to 400. But then again, you have some of these old-fashioned parts in here. These gauges are orange and analog. At low RPM, the engine is lopey and throaty and lazy. I have this glass top, which is run-of-the-mill for the 80s, but something we don't really see in sports cars all that much anymore. This Corvette really is the passing of the torch. Where the C1, 2, and 3, those are old cars. Those are cars that your grandpa owned. Those are cars that you see at Cars and Coffee or Barrett Jackson, and they get all this money and they never get driven and blah, blah, blah. But then the C4 came along and was like, hey, maybe the Corvette can be something modern. Maybe the Corvette can be something competitive with European cars. Maybe it can be competitive with the Japanese cars. Let's actually make something of the Corvette. And I think this car was the one to start that. We got the C5 Z06 because of this car. We got the C6 ZR-1 because of this car, and the following C7 ZR-1 because of this car, and now we have a mid-engine Ferrari-like Corvette. And honestly, I think I have to attribute at least part of that to this car. Respect your elders, man. You gotta respect them. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to North Naperville Autos for letting me take out their 13,000-mile Corvette ZR-1. This thing is absolutely awesome. I'm so glad I've finally driven a C4. I've driven a C5, C6, and C7, but never a C4, so this was really eye-opening to me, and I'm really glad I was able to get behind the wheel of it. North Naperville Autos is absolutely awesome. They are a Carfax certified dealer, as well as they do offer financing now, which is stupendous. Haven't used that word in a review before, but it is stupendous. They are absolutely awesome. Ignacio and David are super, super helpful, super down to earth. They'll find the right car for you. They're not just gonna push whatever has the biggest price tag onto you. They're gonna talk with you. They're gonna figure out what fits your lifestyle, what car you need, and then they will put you into that car. The used car market is insane right now, and North Naperville Autos helps you figure it out, which is absolutely awesome. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.